Hey there, Internet. Welcome to Expired Films. I'm Kevin, and today I wanted to talk about half frame 35mm. So, what I have here is the only half frame camera that I currently have, the Olympus Pen EE. This is a 1950s, 1960s era camera. It shoots standard 135 format, 35mm, but it shoots it in portrait orientation, and two frames fit on what is normally one landscape frame. This has a few benefits. One, you have twice as many photos. So on a 36 exposure roll, you have 72 photos. And it also allows you to do some interesting things as far as composition. So you can simply have twice as many photos, or you can present them as diptychs, which would be two images that are intended to be displayed side by side, or more. It's a little bit more difficult to get it scanned. It usually requires hand scanning, so that could be an added expense if you're not used to shooting it. So that might offset the cost of your otherwise cost-saving measure of using half frame. So this is an automatic camera. There's not really any exposure control. You can set the ISO. It's from 200 ISO all the way down to 10. It has a tripod socket mount, and it uses a selenium light meter. So there are no batteries or electronics that require powering other than that selenium light meter. One of the cool things I like about it is just the general aesthetic of the camera. I think it's a really good looking camera. We'll see if the camera can focus up here. But here you can see the film counter display is a nice almost airplane style dial that shows you there. And it's a really small camera. This can really go in your pocket and go with you anywhere. I've been carrying this camera a lot lately, and I really kind of enjoy the creative process that producing diptychs gives you. So whenever you're doing any kind of creative outlet, when you have a formalism that you're sticking to, that changes things. And typically photographs are snapshots in time, but when you're using a diptych, you are adding an extra dimension. You can either show a process or a change or multiple angles of view, and it's really an interesting way to go about taking photos. So let's look at a couple of shots here. So this was part of an early test roll, and mostly I was composing images to get a feel for the exposure and also just to sort of play with geometric shapes. This is an area on campus, and here I'm showing sort of two fields of view. These areas are right next to each other, and you can kind of get a different feel for the geometric shapes in the area and how the exposure works. As you can see, the selenium light meter has a little bit of trouble with bright skies. It wants to overexpose a little bit. And over time, these selenium meters can degrade. So that's also a thing to take into consideration when you're talking about cameras that are 50 to 70 years old. Again, one of the things that I was just playing with are geometric lines and different shapes. I do like the sort of rounded edges of the frame that is with this camera for every shot, and it has just kind of a nice aesthetic about it. This was a single frame that I took. I have no idea what's going on with this kind of ripple effect going on near this mounted moose skull. So this friend are two friends of mine who are out at a range day trip, and what's interesting is these are unrelated frames. They were taken a couple minutes apart. So one of the things that you do when you're taking diptychs is you have to keep in mind the frame that you took before, and you can piece those things together. So all indications would be that the fellow on the right is looking at the fellow on the left. This is simply not true. This interaction didn't occur. Here's another photo from that same trip, and this is a vintage anti-aircraft cannon, a 20mm cannon, and you can do interesting studies of materials by presenting different fields of view, sort of a macro and a micro shot, whatever is kind of interesting to you. Here's another shot where I'm looking at textures and patterns. One is kind of held at a Dutch angle and juxtaposed, so obviously the lines of a ceiling are probably in the same orientation, but I was just kind of playing with what that might look like. This was an exposure that was a little bit difficult to get with an automatic camera. This is actually the same piece of equipment outside. These things are literally the same. So I was trying to expose through this window in the door and just kind of playing with how those things look. It looks like there's some film damage here on the right, so that could either be from my handling or something in the developing process. This is another attempt with that same idea. And here the camera missed the exposure. I was trying to expose through the window, but I got the door instead. But I kind of like this structure better, so I would have liked the left door in the first one and the right image from the second. One of the things whenever you're dealing with an automatic camera is dealing with differences in exposure. It's difficult to force something. You know that if your camera might be exposing as a general rule, but you would prefer to expose for the highlights or the shadows, you can kind of trick it by pointing at something and half setting the shutter and moving it aside, but occasionally you get things that don't quite work out. And this was another instance where I was forcing the camera to use the exposure from one framing while taking another picture. So this hallway, the light dropped off precipitously, so the only way to get that fan even remotely exposed correctly was to expose at the same spot on the wall. So I set the camera's exposure for that same spot, and you can see there's quite a difference. It's the same wall, they're only about 2 feet apart, and you can see the exposure is pretty radically different. And again, you can simply do more studies of geometric lines or any kind of light-dark combination that you like. So this is a panoramic shot that I took. I kept my feet in the same position, kept roughly the idea of framing in mind, and took 4 separate shots. So this would be 2 frames in a standard 35 millimeter format, and here would be 4 half frames. And this is not quite 180 degrees, but you can do some really interesting things when you start pairing images together. So in general, half frame 35 millimeter can be a really interesting format to shoot. You can either be really cost effective and get twice as many shots per roll, or you can do some really interesting things as far as design and creative process. If you haven't shot the half frame 35 millimeter, I would recommend it to you. Just keep in mind that some of these cameras are getting pretty old and the light meters may be getting faulty. So thanks for tuning in to Expired Films. I'm Kevin, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks.